Hi.
Hello, I just ran away. Hello, I'm back.
Right, do I just stop? Okay. Hi, we're Gateshead MyVoice. We're a group of 13 to 19-year-olds, and we meet up weekly to plan and organise events for young people in Gateshead. Events have included Mugglemania, Harry Potter themed event, Promzilla, a Nightmare Before Christmas event, a gig in the garden, and we're currently organising a murder mystery for this coming Halloween.
The first question is, why did you decide to become a writer?
Okay, why did I decide to become a writer? To think about the answer to these questions. Well, I went to Japan in 1978 and lived there for about 5 years. And when I came back here, I found that when I talked to people about Japan, they had a lot of preconceptions that had no connection with the country that I knew. So I started thinking I needed to tell people about what Japan was really all about. So I suppose one of my incentives was that. One is that I love words. My father is a linguist. I'm very interested in language. So when I was in Japan, I also did my best to learn Japanese. Also, I love literature. I studied English language and literature at Oxford. So I was also interested in literature. I love reading. I think it's quite a hard way to make a living, but it's very, very satisfying.
What was your journey in becoming a writer, and what did you have to do in order to get to the position you are today?
I don't think I ever particularly myself planned to be a writer. I'm not a particularly ambitious person, so I more worked sort of book by book. So the first book that I wanted to write was about traveling in the middle of Japan. And some of it was my desire just to get back to Japan and to have something to do when I got there. So that was the beginning, was doing this journey in Japan, to write a book which is The Narrow Road to the Deep North. But then when I got home, obviously I had to write it. So I had to sit down it took about a year by myself and write it, which is a whole different job. And as you're writing, I guess the actual process of writing changes the way that you think about things. So I found that maybe the book that I ended up with was not the same as the book that I had thought of in the first place. In fact, this applies to all books. So that was the beginning, was writing a travel book. I guess I've always had a life which is partly being abroad, doing traveling and enjoying myself, and partly being at home, writing it all up. So I've had a sort of half my life is active and half my life is much more sort of sedentary, I guess. And so shall I carry on? I mean, after writing this travel book, I then I also wrote some cookbooks, and I did a cookery series on the BBC. And then I also had a program on Channel 4 about my travel book. So that was that part of my journey as a writer. And then I spent the 90s mainly doing journalism, which was a whole different journey, I guess. And writing books is, let's see, doing journalism is quite exciting, because you come up with an idea, then you get in touch with an editor, then you do the research for the article, and then you write it, and all that happens very quickly. Whereas with a book, it's a much longer, more drawn-out process. So sometimes I feel more like writing books, and sometimes I feel more like being a journalist. It depends.
Hi, I've read about why you chose to visit Japan rather than China, despite your connection to it to do with your father. But were you afraid to move there, it being such a foreign and different culture?
I've done lots of traveling, and I've been in lots of foreign countries before. So I like foreign cultures. I like foreign and different cultures. I'd already been to India. I mean, I went to India for about 6 months. And the one thing I knew about Japan was that I had heard it was very expensive. And I thought, rather than just going, I needed to get a job. So I did get a job. And that meant that when I got there, I knew I was going to be there for quite a long time, whereas any other time I've ever traveled, I just sort of set off and didn't know how long I would be away for. But with Japan, I had a year's contract, and then I had another year's contract, and then I stayed on for quite a long time after that. It's a very alien country, I find. That's a rather strong thing to say, but it's quite a sort of a different way of thinking and a way of being. So even when you speak Japanese, you still feel like an outsider in a way that you don't necessarily in other countries. But when I got there, I hitchhiked all over the place. So obviously I didn't find it frightening at all. And I mean, in terms of is it frightening, it's a very safe country. I mean, and I was aware from the very start that it was very safe.
Hi. Do you think your parents played a big part in your becoming a writer and inspired you to get to know about a completely different culture?
Yes, that's a nice question. Well, my mum, as you know, was Chinese. My dad was a professor of Chinese. My dad always said I should do anthropology at university. My dad spent a lot of his time abroad. When I was growing up, he was in Malaya, which is now Malaysia. He was in Laos. He was in Vietnam. So I knew that my dad was traveling a lot, and I felt quite a strong desire to go traveling myself. He also was very keen on stories, so he read me stories when I was a little girl, lots and lots and lots of stories. So I had a whole background of Greek myths and legends and Norse myths and legends and Chinese fairy stories and Sinbad the Sailor and Scheherazade. So there was all that element that I think perhaps led towards my becoming a writer. I guess I like stories, so that's an important part. My mum, I guess, I was aware of her family having come from Asia and this sort of movement from her granddad turned up in Canada, and then she was born in Canada, so were her brothers and sisters, and then she came over from there to England. So it was all these kind of movements and cultures, which in America is fairly straightforward. I mean, everybody in America is an immigrant, but over here, most people, perhaps born in the same place as their parents were born. Whereas I wasn't. I mean, I was English, but my parents were both Canadian. So maybe that also made me more sort of curious about other places and other cultures.
What is it about Japan that you found so compelling to write about so much?
Oh, huge question, because I've spent such a lot of time there. It's quite hard to answer. The first thing that drew me there was the pottery and also the literature. There's a wonderful book called The Penguin Anthology of Japanese Literature, and I read that before I left. So that meant I had a little sampling of Japanese literature right through the ages, and I'd read that. Japan is a little island, like England. It's a bit bigger than England, but it's pretty much like England. And because an island is a whole different universe from a country on the continent. England is different from France. France connects up to all these other countries, like Germany and Spain. But England's sort of on its own. And Japan is the same. And people that live in island countries have certain characteristics in common, I think. So Japan has a really distinctive and very alluring and very romantic history. And it also has fantastic literature. It has great theatre. It has amazing art. It just about everything you can think of. Everything you can think of. Oh, it has great food. It has great food as well. So it's a whole other universe that you can step into. And also I found, once you speak the language, it's like having the key to Looking Glass Land. It is kind of like Looking Glass Land. It looks quite Western, as you know. It's a wealthy country, but not like India at all. It looks Western, but underneath the surface, it's really different. So that feeling that you've actually got the key, you can open the door and you can step through into another world which is very different from your own, and have a language and talk to people. I mean, that's a very wonderful thing. I found that when I came back to England, I would feel terribly sort of nostalgic for Japan, and I'd go, every time I could see a Japanese movie, I would go and see it. But I still do. I go and see Japanese movies just so I can sort of see Japan again.
Okay. Out of all the books and pieces of work you've written, which one are you most proud of?
I'm proud of quite a few for different reasons. I'm rather proud of my latest novel, I have to say. I'm proud of Across a Bridge of Dreams. I think I feel as if each novel I've written is kind of taking me down the road a little bit further. I'm learning as I go along. I was also proud of my first book. I love my first book, On the Narrow Road to the Deep North. I was just awfully fond of it because it was my very first book, and I was sort of proud that I'd written it. And I had tried very much to take people with me to Japan, and that was what I tried to do, and I hoped that I'd achieve that. But then the brothers, I'm also quite proud of, because that was very, very difficult to research and quite frightening to research at times. So I was quite proud of having achieved that as well. Yeah, that's. But I'm also proud of Geisha. I don't know which I'm most proud of, because I've written books in different genres, so they each have sort of different things I'm exploring.
During your time living amongst geishas, did you learn anything that was significant to you and you still apply in your day-to-day life?
Yes. Geisha are very good at being, they're very strong women, and they are very independent, and they are very feminine, and they're very good at getting what they want, but they're never pushy and they're never feminist. There's a famous geisha saying, which is, a clever woman never lets a man know how clever she is, which is something that I think English people probably think is very shocking, and you shouldn't think like that. But I think it's rather smart. I think rather than being kind of loud and arguing a lot and, you know, asserting your independence as feminists do, I think you can get through life much more easily by kind of by being feminine. I guess, yeah, it's possible. The thing I learned that I liked best was that it's possible to be feminine and to be independent at the same time. That's that.
In the Courtesan and the Samurai, which perspective did you most enjoy writing from?
Yeah, actually, it was fun for me that in the last concubine, I only wrote from the woman's perspective. But in the Courtesan and the Samurai, I could explore writing from a woman's viewpoint and from a man's viewpoint, and the same with Across a Bridge to Dreams. I must say, I got rather caught up in the whole the war, the story of the battle that went on, and the great ship and all that. So I found that writing from the man's perspective was interesting. And my husband is very keen on military stuff, so he read it all through. He made sure that my guns were the right guns and my cannons were the right cannons. But then I'd also been very interested in the Oshiwara, so I enjoyed writing from the woman's perspective about life as a courtesan, and about the training of a courtesan, and about the sort of clothes that they wore, and about, you know, I tried to imagine how it would feel to be doing the figure of 8 walk, walking on 12-inch clogs in the pleasure quarters. So I suppose if I have to pick which one I enjoy more, I mean, I would sort of step inside the skin of one person when I was writing from that perspective. But I did begin with Hannah's perspective. So the book begins and ends from Hannah's point of view. So Hannah is the main character, I suppose. But it was interesting writing two different stories.
When you visited Japan, did you feel out of place?
I go to Japan a lot. Yes. You are always a foreigner. You can't avoid being a foreigner. I did feel out of place, and I did feel, I felt it was important to learn Japanese as quickly as I could. So I did. I mean, the town where I lived, the very first town where I lived, there were no other Westerners, only me. Eventually I found 2 more, but for a long, long time it was only me. So there were no teachers of Japanese because there were no Westerners. So I felt if I couldn't speak Japanese, I wouldn't fit in at all. And so I guess maybe that was one thing that inspired me to want to learn as much as I could about the culture and learn the language and so on. I'm 5'5", and 5'5" was pretty tall for a woman in Japan at that point. So I was taller than most of the other women. And I wear size 6 shoes, and people commented on what big feet I had. And they also commented on how big my nose was. And after I was living only with Japanese for ages, I started looking in the mirror, or, you know, when you pass by a shop and you catch a glimpse of yourself, and I think, oh God, that nose, it's so huge. I've got to have a nose job. And then I came back here and I looked at everybody else. Or I'm looking at you and I thought, no, I'm okay. My nose is fine. I did. If everybody you see is Japanese all the time, and then you look in the mirror and you see this person that has a huge nose, you think, oh God. So I guess from that point of view, yes, of course I felt out of place. And there's a word, gaijin, which means foreigner, which means an outside person. And when I first got to Japan, I couldn't understand what they were saying, but somebody was looking for a flat for me to live in, and I could hear her on the phone, and she was phoning up landlords, and instead of saying, I'm looking for a flat, she would say, I'm looking for a flat for the foreigner, for a foreigner. And then the landlord you could hear them going, oh, no, we don't want a foreigner. So, I mean, people kept reminding me all the time that I was different from them. They also wanted to know why I wasn't like a typical foreigner. Because, for example, I was vegetarian. I'm still vegetarian, but I was vegetarian. And Japanese don't eat much meat, but they all thought foreigners ate steak. So they'd all say, why don't you eat steak? And it was like, why don't I fit their preconceptions of what a foreigner is? Also at that point, I didn't drink coffee, and they'd always say, oh, but foreigners all drink coffee. And I'd say, no, I don't drink coffee. I kept trying to sort of tell them, I'm just me. I'm not a typical foreigner. I'm just one person. Yeah.
What is your opinion on the honour system within the Army of Japan?
Well, the army has changed quite a lot. In the courtesan and the samurai, I write about the army under the shoguns who were fighting against the new army, of the emperor. And in Across a Bridge of Dreams, I suppose, are you talking about Across a Bridge of Dreams? About Nobu in Across a Bridge of Dreams. And how it sort of, well, at that point, the training in the army was done by French people, because they thought that they thought the French army was the best in the world. So everything was done in French. You had to learn French. You had to learn all about France before you could start doing proper army training. It was a fledgling army. They were just learning how to do it, and very shortly after Across the Bridge of Dreams, there was a war between France and Prussia won. So then the Japanese thought, oh, maybe we got it wrong. Maybe the army should be based on the Prussian model, not the French model. So they got in Prussian tutors, and now they have German uniforms. They don't have French uniforms anymore. What do I think about the army? The army as a way of life. Gosh, I think what was extraordinary in Across the Bridge of Dreams was that it was a time when there were a lot of new things happening, like conscription. So before, the warriors had all been samurai, and then they started taking on peasants, and they started taking on people who were willing to obey orders and who were being kind of trained to fight, as opposed to samurai who were not willing to take orders at all. Is this okay? Is this what you're asking? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Yes. So the army was a fledgling army. They were just working out how it was going to work. And I mean, Across the Bridge of Dreams begins in 1873, which was the very year that conscription first happened. So then you got people like Bunkichi and Zenkichi in my novel, who suddenly were forced to join the army, and there was no time to train them properly, so they ended up, sometimes pushing 2 bullets into their rifle at once instead of 1, and so the rifle would blow up in their face. So it was like a complete change of the whole system of Japan, to take people who had always expected to be peasants and to put them in the army. Whereas in the past, there'd been a whole warrior class, and they'd been the ones who were fighting.
You seem to go into a lot of detail about the history of Japan in your books. How did you gain so much knowledge?
I like history very much. In my novels, they're set in this period, which was 1860s and the 1870s, and Japan was pretty much to the west till 1853, and then a few Westerners were allowed to go to Japan, beginning with the first American envoy, and then various diplomatic people, and all these people knew they had never been. They all knew that Japan had been closed. They knew that nobody had ever seen this amazing country before, and a lot of them wrote books. So they wrote books in English. So there are lots and lots of fantastic books in English for a start. One can use for research, with people like Algernon Mitford writing about his personal experiences of Japan, in 1860. And when I read these books, I'm so jealous. I mean, I wish I could have been there. It just sounds amazing. So for a start, there's that. Then there's just ordinary history books. There's books written in Japanese which were translated into English. So there's lots and lots of material that one can use. There's tons of books. I mean, you can see all behind me, all my books, tons of books about Japan. Also, when I go to Japan, I travel a lot, and I go and look at these the sites of the places that I'm going to write about. So I actually visit these historical places.
How long does it take you to write a novel, and do you get writer's block?
Well, I can answer that question at this point. It took me 1 year and 4 months to do the first draft of Across a Bridge of Dreams. And then it went to the editor who made some suggestions, and then it came back to me, and it took me another 2 months probably for the second draft. I don't get writer's block. I sit at my desk and I write stuff. And some days it's no good, and other days it's okay. Some days it's really good. But I always, I guess if I have a deadline, then that puts pressure on me to work. So I don't think I've ever had writer's block as such. No. There's some days it's not very good, but then, I'm very persistent. So if I'm having a day that's not very good, then I don't go for a walk. I don't phone my friends. I just sit there till I produce something.
Are you working on anything new?
I wrote a short story which was going to come out as an ebook, which is the story of the first American consul and his geisha. So I enjoyed writing a short story because it finished more quickly. I'm also having a rest. I'm enjoying having a rest, and I'm thinking about my next book, but I haven't actually started to work on it yet. But I'm writing quite a few short stories at the moment. I'm enjoying writing something that has a sort of visible end point. The short story I wrote took me about a month, whereas to write a book would take me, as I said, a year or so at least.
Thank you for the whole thing.
Okay, thank you very much.